The string lights hummed softly above the garden, and the two front-row chairs with my parents' names sat untouched white cards pinned like little flags over snow. The florist had tucked pale roses along the aisle, their scent drifting under a sky that had finally decided to be kind. I felt the weight of the bouquet in my hands, heavier than it looked, heavier than I'd planned. Somewhere beyond the hedges, a violin tested the first notes of our processional. My phone buzzed. A text slid onto the screen as I stood alone in the vestibule of the carriage house. "Good luck tomorrow." Thomas scored the winning touchdown. "Everyone is so proud." I stared until the words blurred and the screen dimmed, until the edges of the moment went quiet and cold. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever had a chair with your name on it, sit empty. When it mattered most, tap that like button and share this with someone who'll understand. Make sure you're subscribed so you won't miss the next chapters of this story. But to understand why those chairs stayed empty, you need to know where that habit began. I grew up in a neighborhood where every driveway looked measured and every lawn looked judged. Our house in Rochester had the clean smell of lemon polish on Saturday mornings, and the white runner in the hall seemed designed to keep footsteps in line. My parents built their life like a brochure glossy quiet and meant to be seen from the street. Inside, affection lived on a short leash. Praise came in exact measurements, calibrated to the size of a trophy and the audience in the room. At the dining table, my father kept his voice steady and his tie straight, as if either might tip if he relaxed. He'd glance past my worksheets to admire the angles of my brother's Lego tower, declaring it evidence of creative genius. My mother set plates down lightly, the way people put down things they want to reuse for company. If I brought home a perfect report card, I watched her face for a sign, any sign that she'd seen me. She'd smile with her lips and say, "That's good, dear," then lean sideways to ask Thomas if practice went well. He'd shrug and grin, and suddenly the table glowed. I learned to make myself small in spaces that were supposed to hold me. I learned to speak in the gaps between their compliments for him. When I found computer programming at 12, a school lab humming monitors, a screen that didn't look away, I felt something settle. Code had rules that didn't change with the weather. If it broke, you fixed it. If you did the work, it worked. My mother called it antisocial. My father asked why I couldn't try something with a podium. I kept my first programs on a flash drive in a mint-tin small sturdy mine. At 16, I applied for a job at a tech repair shop, 2 bus rides, and 3 blocks past where my parents decided the nice part of town ended. The shop smelled like dusted fans and hot coffee. Gina, who wore her hair in a loose bun and talked like the day was solvable, taught me how to listen to a machine's small complaints. When a jittery laptop crashed in a loop, none of the manuals could map, she handed it to me and said, "Take your time, kid." The fix took 4 hours and a thin-wristed stubbornness I didn't know had a use. When the screen finally held steady, Gina grinned at me like I'd just lifted a car. "You have a mind built for maps nobody drew," she said. It was the first time anyone named my talent without turning it into a warning. The fights at home were mostly whispers. Money was a wind you were supposed to pretend you didn't feel. We had a college fund when it made for good conversation with neighbors. The night after my graduation, valedictorian speech folded neatly in my purse, I walked past the kitchen door and heard the decision arrive without me. "At least she has the scholarship," my father said, glasses clinking as he set them down. "We'll move the fund to Thomas. He'll need the help." My mother didn't argue. There was a pause, like a signature. I stood there with my palms sweating, thinking of all the ways you can be orphaned in the house where you sleep. College felt like a window that actually opened. The computer science building hummed like a puzzle with answers inside it. I found my people in study rooms that smelled like highlighters and whatever the vending machines were pretending to be. With Zoe and Amanda, I learned the ordinary miracle of being seen without earning it first. We wrote code past midnight, trading jokes we were too tired to remember in the morning. We still cooked the cheap noodles, but they tasted different when you laughed while the water boiled. When I met Jack at a hackathon, he noticed my implementation before he noticed my face. "You trimmed that search time like you'd cut the lock off a fence?" he said, eyes bright, voice soft. I tried to deflect with a joke, but he understood the joke and the thing beneath it. He came from a house that smelled like cinnamon and open windows. His parents, Laura and Robert, set an extra place by instinct. They listened with their hands still, eyes on mine. The first dinner there, Laura asked about a project I'd mentioned in one sentence a week earlier, and remembered the part I'd left small. I realized Love Like Code had versions. Some compile, some don't. The first time I told my parents about Jack, they audited his family before they asked what I liked about him. A teacher and a baker, my mother said, like you make a face when you sit on a tack. Stable, my father offered, which was the closest he came to kindness for a stranger. They asked what he wanted to be, as if the answer himself were too vague to bank. When we told them we'd found a small apartment near both our jobs, second-hand couch, sun-warmed windowsill, a view of a brick alley that looked beautiful at 5 p.m. My mother pressed her lips thin. "What will people think?" she asked. "That I'm old enough to pay my own rent?" I said, and surprised myself by not apologizing after. Nexus Tech felt like standing near the center of something alive. I learned where performance lived and where honesty could. I wrote code the way some people knit loop pull, keep the tension even. Make something that warms someone who hasn't met you. The promotion arrived without theater. My manager sat back and said, "Your work anticipates the problem. That's rare." When the acquisition hit and the numbers in my stock account turned into a sum that felt like a door unlocking, I stared at the screen and thought of that mint tin in my desk. It was still there, stupidly full of old code like a relic from a smaller season of air. I didn't tell my parents about the windfall. Not because I was hiding, but because I'd learned how quickly a gift becomes an invoice in that house. Jack and I met with a financial planner who preferred plain words. We mapped what mattered a home with a quiet porch light future tuition. We would not skip across a kitchen discussion, a fun that would help girls with minds like maps nobody drew. I felt my shoulders settle the way they had when Gina first said the word talent without flinching. When we set the date for our wedding, I mailed the save the date cards in envelopes I sealed with a silly little stamp of a blue flower. I checked flights for my parents and booked their hotel because I knew they'd call late and say it was complicated. I reserved 2 front-row seats and imagined just once their faces soft with uncomplicated joy. Instead, 2 weeks before the ceremony, the phone rang while I was folding napkins with Zoe at our apartment table. The evening light had that golden spill that makes ordinary things look held. My mother's voice had a brightness that was almost brittle. "We've looked at the calendar," she said, the way people announce a verdict. "There's a conflict. A beat. Thomas has regionals that weekend. As captain, he needs family in the stands." I could hear my father breathing on another extension, a habit he'd never stopped. "Family comes first," he added, definitive as a stamp. I felt the napkin in my hands go stiff. The quiet inside me wasn't shock. It was recognition lining up with the past, like a well-worn groove. "You had our date 10 months ago," I said, trying to keep my voice level the way you carry a full glass across a room. "The tournament schedule came out last week," my father replied. "These things happen." My mother offered a solution she thought would sound generous. "We can FaceTime in. We'll see the important parts." I could see the chairs, already white cards, their names black and formal, the bouquet heavier than it looked. Somewhere down the hall, Zoe stopped folding and set her hands flat on the table, anchoring me without a word. I told them I understood. I did too well. I hung up before my voice cracked on air. The room stayed very still. Zoe reached across and covered my clenched fist with her palm warm and steady. "You don't have to prove anything to them," she said. Outside, the alley went blue with evening. A neighbor's dog barked at someone it loved coming home. Jack came through the door a minute later, took one look at my face and set his keys down without a sound. He wrapped me up in arms I didn't have to deserve, and I cried in a way that didn't perform for anyone. In the days that followed, the practical things kept moving the way trains do, even if you're not ready. The seamstress pinned my hem. The florist called about the peonies. Laura texted to ask whether we wanted lemon or almond for the smaller cake and followed it with, "We're making both, sweetheart." The chairs with my parents' names stayed on the order. I couldn't bring myself to ask the planner to take them off. Some part of me, tired or foolish or simply human, kept a sliver of space open because daughters are taught to set a place even when the guest never comes. On the morning I walked into that garden, the light held its breath. Jack's father offered his arm with the gentle authority of a man who knows the weight of moments. "I would be honored," he said. I touched his sleeve, felt the kindness in the gesture, and then felt something else, a quiet certainty, rising like a tide. "Thank you," I whispered. "But I think I need to walk myself." He nodded, eyes warm, no offense taken, no story attached. I took one step, then another, down an aisle lined with people who had chosen me without conditions. Laughter lived in that room the way light lives in a window you open for the first time in spring. I kept my eyes on Jack, whose whole face said, "I see you," and let the ache travel and pass. 2 chairs to my left remained empty, their place cards upright patient. The violin found its melody. The vows waited like a shoreline. What I didn't know then, standing between the weight of old habits and the clean air ahead, was how that emptiness would echo after the music faded. How a text tossed like a pebble into a quiet morning would deepen the hollow I'd been taught to carry. And how the silence that followed my "I do" would stretch into months that would teach me more about being alone than any childhood hallway ever had. The first night after the wedding, the ocean outside our balcony moved like silver glass. Jack's hand rested over mine as we listened to the slow rhythm of waves brushing the sand. I remember thinking that peace had a sound, quiet, steady, unbothered. I held on to that sound through the long hours that followed, trying not to think about the 2 empty chairs left behind in the garden. But silence has a way of returning when you stop pretending you can't hear it. Back home, I unpacked my gown and hung it carefully in the closet. The faint smell of lilies still clung to the fabric. Jack turned on soft music while we stacked gifts and thank you cards across the dining table. For a while, it felt normal, our life moving forward, our love settled in its new shape. Yet every so often, I'd glance toward my phone on the counter, waiting for something that wasn't coming. No call, no message, not even a postcard from Rochester. It was as if my parents had crossed me out of their story entirely. 3 weeks later, I made the decision I'd been avoiding. I blocked their numbers, unfollowed their accounts, and set my phone face down. The world didn't collapse. The sun rose, the coffee brewed, the small things kept happening. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Martin, who had the kind of calm that made you breathe slower without realizing it. Her office smelled faintly of cedar and mint, and her window looked out over the city park, where old men played chess on stone tables. During our first session, she asked what I wanted from therapy. I told her I wanted to stop feeling like a child waiting to be chosen. She nodded, jotting something down, then looked at me gently. "You're already choosing yourself by being here," she said. Those words landed quietly like a key placed on a table. The weeks unfolded like slow pages. At work, I buried myself in projects that challenged and absorbed me. My team at Quantum Systems relied on precision, and I found comfort in tasks that had clear rules and outcomes. No guessing games, no conditional love, only logic and effort. When deadlines loomed, Jack would bring me a cup of chamomile tea and kiss my temple. "Take a breath, Crystal," he'd whisper. "You don't have to prove anything tonight." I'd nod, even if a small part of me still tried to earn what was already mine. Saturday mornings became sacred. Jack and I would drive to the farmer's market, fill our canvas bags with fresh bread and apples, and share coffee from paper cups while the town woke up around us. Sometimes we met Zoe and Amanda there, and the four of us would find a bench near the fountain trading stories about work, about new technology, about ordinary life. These were the moments that reminded me what family could feel like, unforced warm, without hidden balances to keep. But healing isn't a straight line. Some evenings I'd come home from work and find myself standing in the kitchen, scrolling through old photos I swore I'd deleted. My parents' faces frozen in polite smiles. Thomas, at 10 years old, grinning with a missing tooth, while my hand hovered just out of frame. The ache would rise without warning. I'd set the phone down and walk outside to the porch, letting the night air pull me back to the present. Dr. Martin taught me a phrase I carried everywhere. "Their behavior defines them, not you." She said it so many times, it became like a heartbeat in the background of my thoughts. When memories surfaced, the birthday dinners, they'd skip the way my mother's praise always came with a condition I repeated it quietly until my shoulders eased. Months passed this way. Jack's career grew alongside mine, and we found a rhythm that felt like partnership, not performance. We'd cook dinner together, most nights him chopping vegetables, while I stirred sauces or tasted wine. The hum of the dishwasher after dinner became our soundtrack. Sometimes we'd end the evening on the couch, the dog curled between us, both of us half asleep with the TV still glowing. Peace doesn't announce itself. I learned it settles slowly like dust on quiet furniture. 6 months after the wedding, a sleek delivery truck pulled into our driveway. The driver stepped out and asked me to sign for the car I'd ordered months before the Tesla I'd promised myself when I got my promotion. It gleamed in the afternoon light, deep blue against the gray of our driveway. I traced a hand over the door, feeling equal parts pride and disbelief. Jack stood beside me, arm around my shoulder. "You earned every bit of this," he said. We took a short drive that evening, the hum of the motor barely louder than our laughter. When we got home, I snapped a picture for Facebook, a simple photo, no caption beyond "finally here." I didn't think twice. I had unblocked my family weeks ago, assuming the silence meant distance had become peace. The next morning, my phone buzzed as I poured coffee. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the voice on the other end erased 6 months of quiet in a single breath. "Crystal," my mother said, sharp and certain. "Where did you get the money for that car?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. The kitchen light flickered across the mug in my hand, and I could hear her inhale, ready to fill the silence with control. "Good morning, Mom," I managed. "I'm fine, thanks for asking." "Don't be clever," she snapped. "That car costs at least $80,000. What are you doing spending money like that? Are you in trouble?" The same disbelief that once used to crush me now barely stirred the surface. "I bought it with my own money," I said quietly. "I've done well at work. Computer people don't make that kind of money," she replied, each word clipped. "Not your age. Did Jack's family give it to you?" Her suspicion landed like a familiar slap, an old rhythm I'd learned not to dance to. "Mom, you can believe whatever helps you sleep at night," I said. "But I promise you, we're fine." There was rustling, and then my father's voice replaced hers, loud, authoritative, the sound of a man who never asked before deciding. "Crystal, your mother says you bought a Tesla." "That's not a small purchase. We're coming over tomorrow." "Noon. Family meeting." "Family meeting?" I repeated, stunned. "Yes, We'll discuss this properly. There are family matters to consider. And then the line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, coffee cooling in my hand, the morning light fading from gold to gray. The old feeling, the one I thought I'd buried under months of therapy and calm, pressed against my chest again. Obligation mixed with dread, a weight that didn't belong to me anymore, but still knew my name. When Jack came in from walking Cooper, he stopped mid-step. What happened? They're coming tomorrow, I said, staring at the phone. They saw the car online. He frowned. After everything? After missing the wedding. Apparently that's worth a meeting. He set down the leash and came closer. You don't owe them anything. Not an explanation, not a visit. I wanted to agree. I wanted to tell him I'd block their numbers again and let the silence stay clean. But another part of me, the one Dr. Martin called the child who still wants to be heard, wouldn't let it go. I think I need to see them, I said finally. Not to explain, to end it properly. Jack studied me for a moment, then nodded. Then we do it on your terms. I'll be right there beside you. That night, we sat at the dining table, the same one where we'd written our vows, and planned how to keep control of the conversation. I emailed Dr. Martin and scheduled a last-minute session for the morning. Her reply came quickly. You're ready. Remember, peace doesn't mean silence. It means boundaries that hold. When I lay in bed later, the glow of the Tesla's headlights still faint through the curtains, I thought of how many years I'd waited for my parents to notice me for something more than a grade or a prize. Tomorrow, they'd see me clearly, whether they wanted to or not. The following day began like any other sun through the kitchen window, Jack's quiet movements as he fed the dog, the scent of coffee in the air. But beneath it all, a steady pulse of anticipation thrummed through me. I gathered the documents that proved my success. Redacted pay stubs, stock records, photos from conferences I'd presented at, and placed them neatly in a folder. I wasn't showing off. I was preparing the truth so no one could twist it again. Around 10, a text came from an old friend back home. Your mom's been telling folks that Jack's family bought the car for you. I stared at the screen until my stomach tightened, then showed it to Jack. He sighed, his jaw tightening. They're already rewriting the story, he said. I nodded, feeling the calm shift inside me from sadness to something steadier. Then tomorrow isn't about explaining. It's about reclaiming. Jack reached across the table, took my hand, and smiled softly. Whatever happens, you're not that little girl at the dining table anymore. Outside, the wind lifted the edge of the porch flag, brushing it against the post like a quiet metronome. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the low hum of a passing car, the same sound my Tesla made when it moved down the street. I closed my eyes and let the calm settle again, knowing what was coming would shake the stillness but not break it. When I woke the next morning, I felt strangely light. The fear that had followed me since childhood wasn't gone, but it had lost its grip. I ironed a simple blouse, brewed coffee, and opened the curtains wide. The driveway gleamed under the noon sun. Soon I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, the sound of a life I'd once thought I needed returning for one last claim. I stood in the doorway, the air steady in my chest, ready to open the door to whatever came next. The bell rang exactly at noon. Through the front window, I watched their silver sedan glide up the drive like a memory I hadn't invited. Jack stood beside me silent, the soft ticking of the kitchen clock keeping time with my breath. I had imagined this moment 100 ways, yet none of them prepared me for how small my mother looked stepping out of the car. She straightened her coat before my father came around to open her door, his movements sharp and controlled, as if good posture could rewrite the past. I opened the door before they had the chance to knock. "Come in," I said. My voice sounded calm, though my palms were damp. They crossed the threshold without a word of greeting, their eyes flicking over every surface of our home. My mother's gaze caught on the curtains. She touched the fabric between her fingers, pretending to admire it, but really checking the quality. My father's eyes went straight to the Tesla in the driveway. "Nice place," he said finally. His tone sat halfway between surprise and suspicion. "We're comfortable," I replied, motioning them toward the living room. Jack appeared with a tray of water glasses and offered them each one. They thanked him politely, but without warmth. We all sat Jack beside me, my parents across from us, a coffee table between like a drawn line. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Let's get right to it. That car outside costs $88,000. Where did that money come from?" I had rehearsed this moment for days, but the bluntness of his tone still hit hard. I reached for the folder on the table and placed it in front of me. "Before we discuss anything financial, I'd like to share some context." My mother's expression tightened. "Context," she repeated, as though the word itself were an inconvenience. I opened the folder and handed them a single page, a printed list of my career milestones. "This is a summary of my work since college," I said quietly. "Positions, held patents, filed conferences, presented." My father took the paper and adjusted his glasses. "Patents," he murmured. 3. "Yes," I said, "all related to database indexing and security design." For a moment, he didn't speak. My mother glanced at the list, then set it aside like an old menu. "That's all very nice, dear," she said. "But people exaggerate these things online. Everyone calls themselves an expert now." I slid another page forward, a redacted copy of my compensation after the company acquisition. "These numbers are accurate," I said. "When Nexus Tech was acquired by Quantum Systems, my stock options converted at the rate shown there." They leaned over the page, their eyes darting across the blacked-out lines to the few visible figures. I watched as understanding replaced doubt, followed quickly by something colder, calculation. My father cleared his throat. "So, this is how you can afford that car and this house?" "Yes," I said. "Every bit of it came from my own work." My mother's face softened suddenly. "Well," she said, voice bright, "we always knew you'd do well, didn't we, Harold?" My father nodded quickly, catching her cue. "Of course. We encouraged your interest in technology from the start." The words came like a slap wrapped in velvet. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but kept my voice even. "You discouraged it," I said quietly. "You told me computers were for people with no social skills. You called my first job a waste of time." My mother's smile wavered. "We only wanted what was best for you." I slid another set of papers across the table, screenshots of messages and social posts, their own words retelling the story of my wedding. "And when you told people that I abandoned the family, I asked, that I scheduled the wedding during Thomas's tournament to hurt you." My father's jaw tightened. "That's private family business," he said. "Not when you shared it publicly," I answered. I placed a printed copy of our Save the Date card beside the confirmation email for Thomas's tournament registration. "You knew the tournament was months after the wedding. You chose to skip it." The silence that followed was sharp. My parents exchanged a glance that carried more than words, defensiveness, denial, and a touch of fear. "We did what we thought was right," my mother said finally. "Thomas needed our support, and I didn't." My voice broke just slightly, then steadied again. Before anyone could answer, the doorbell rang. Jack looked at me puzzled. I frowned, not expecting anyone else. He stood and went to the door. When he returned, my brother was with him. Thomas stepped into the room, hands in his pockets, looking uneasy but determined. "Hey," he said softly. Eyes on me first, then shifting to our parents. What are you doing here? My mother asked, alarm sharpening her tone. I called him, I said. He should be part of this. You had no right, my father began, but Thomas cut him off. Actually, I think she did. He moved farther into the room and sat in the empty chair beside me. There's a lot that needs saying. My parents froze, clearly unsettled. Thomas had always been their golden boy, the one who never questioned their authority. Seeing him seated next to me felt like the first crack in a long, silent wall. Mom, Dad, he said carefully. Crystal and I have been talking, really talking. My mother tried to smile, but her eyes darted nervously between us. That's nice, she said. But this isn't about sibling bonding. We're here to sort out finances. Thomas shook his head. No, you're here to keep control. His voice stayed calm but firm. Do you know what it felt like hearing Crystal tell me about her wedding? About that text message you sent the night before? My father exhaled sharply. We did what we thought was best for the family. That's always your excuse, Thomas said quietly. You built a family around appearances, not people. While you were teaching me to win football games, she was learning to survive being invisible. For the first time in my life, I saw my parents at a loss for words. My mother's hands fidgeted in her lap, twisting the edge of her sleeve. My father leaned back, eyes narrowing, searching for control he no longer had. Thomas turned toward me, his voice softer. I'm sorry, Crystal. I didn't see it before. I let their version of things become mine. I believed I earned the attention they gave me, but it was stolen from you. The air in the room changed. Something heavy I'd carried for decades loosened. My throat tightened, but I managed to speak. Thank you, I whispered. That means more than you know. My father cleared his throat loudly. Enough of this. We came to discuss family matters, not emotional therapy. Jack's voice broke the tension. If this is about money, there's nothing to discuss. Everything Crystal has belongs to her. My father turned toward him defensive. When a daughter comes into substantial wealth, there are tax considerations, estate implications. As the head of the family I should be involved in? I laughed softly, the sound surprising even me. You stopped being head of anything in my life years ago. His mouth opened, then closed again. My mother's tone turned icy. Success has clearly changed you, she said, and not for the better. I met her gaze steadily. You're right. Success changed me. It taught me I don't need to earn love by shrinking myself. I rose to my feet slowly, every heartbeat steady now. I didn't invite you here to explain my choices or my finances. I invited you to see the truth. I built this life despite your neglect, not because of your guidance. My father muttered something under his breath, but I pressed on. I forgive you, I said quietly. Not because what you did was okay, but because carrying it around only hurt me. I'm done carrying it. They both looked stunned. Forgiveness wasn't the language they expected. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I continued. If you want to be part of my life moving forward, you'll have to acknowledge the hurt you caused both privately to me and publicly to the family you misled. You'll have to respect my boundaries, my choices, and my marriage. I took a breath. Those are my terms. The choice is yours. For a long time, no one spoke. My parents' faces were unreadable. My mother's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. My father's jaw worked as if chewing on pride too tough to swallow. Finally, he stood. We'll think about it, he said stiffly. My mother rose too, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her purse. "This isn't how we raised you." "I know," I said softly. "That's why I had to raise myself." They left without another word. Through the window, I watched their car pull away, the afternoon sun glinting off the windshield until it disappeared around the corner. The house went silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. Thomas stayed seated, staring at his hands. "That could have gone worse," he said quietly. I nodded, exhaling for what felt like the first time in years. "It also could have gone better," I said. He looked at me with a small, tired smile. "You really meant it, didn't you? The forgiveness I did?" I said. "For me, not for them." Jack crossed the room and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did more than stand up for yourself," he said. "You reclaimed your story." Outside, the wind stirred the trees, scattering a few leaves across the driveway. For the first time, the sound didn't feel lonely. It felt like space, open and waiting. Thomas rose from his chair. "Whatever happens next," he said, "I'm here. I'm done pretending." I nodded, feeling an unfamiliar lightness bloom behind my ribs. As he left, I caught my reflection in the window, a woman standing in her own home, steady and unshaken. The girl who used to beg for approval was gone. In her place stood someone who finally understood the quiet strength of being enough. The evening light faded slowly, stretching across the living room floor. Somewhere deep inside, I knew the hardest part was over, but the story wasn't finished yet. The next chapter would come on its own time, as healing always does. And when it did, I'd be ready to meet it with open hands. The house felt different after they left, quieter, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that comes when the air finally settles after a long storm. Jack poured 2 glasses of water and handed me one without speaking. I sank into the sofa, feeling the edges of adrenaline fade. The clock ticked softly in the corner, marking the end of something I hadn't realized I was still holding on to. For the first time in my adult life, I felt unshaken. The confrontation hadn't destroyed me. It had steadied me. The little girl who used to whisper apologies for existing had been replaced by a woman who could stand in her own living room and tell the truth without trembling. 3 days later, I opened my laptop to find a new email thread lighting up my inbox subject line, "Family Update." The sender was my father. Against my better judgment, I opened it. His words were clipped almost professional, full of phrases like miscommunication and emotional overreaction. It ended with, "We hope you'll reconsider your tone in future interactions." I closed the laptop gently and exhaled through my teeth. Jack caught my expression as he came into the kitchen. "They're trying to rewrite it again?" he asked. I nodded. "It's their language. Rewrite, reframe, redeem themselves." Jack leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Then let the story stay written where it matters. You said what you needed to say." That evening, Thomas called. His voice sounded tight but not uncertain. "They're furious," he said quietly. "Mom's been pacing the house. Dad keeps repeating that you embarrassed him." I smiled faintly. "That's the truth's favorite side effect." He laughed softly, then hesitated. "I told them I wasn't going along with their version. I sent a reply all to that family email. You might get copied on it." He wasn't exaggerating. An hour later, the email came through. I read it twice, blinking at the calm grace of his words. He didn't defend me with anger, he told the truth plainly. "Crystal deserves support, not judgment. I hope we can all reflect on how we contributed to this distance and find a way to heal." No dramatics, just honesty. And for the first time, it wasn't coming only from me. The next few weeks unfolded with an unexpected stillness. My parents went silent again, but the silence no longer hurt. I had finally said everything that needed saying, and the echoes were working their way through our family like slow-moving rain. Dr. Martin noticed the difference immediately. During our next session, she smiled as I settled into the chair across from her. "You look lighter," she said. "I feel lighter," I replied. "It's strange there's grief in it, but it's clean. Like the kind that finally knows where to land." She nodded thoughtfully. "Closure isn't about their apology, it's about your release." I thought of that later as I walked home under a sky streaked with pink clouds, the kind that make the evening look forgiving. The air smelled faintly of lilac from the neighbor's yard. I realized I didn't feel the usual tightness in my chest when I thought of home. The ache had softened into something bearable memory, not open wound. Jack noticed the change too. One night on the back porch, he wrapped an arm around me and said, "You laugh more easily now." I rested my head against his shoulder. I think I finally ran out of space for resentment. It takes up too much room. Spring rolled into early summer, and Thomas began visiting more often. Sometimes he brought his new girlfriend Alicia, a quiet woman with thoughtful eyes who worked in IT security. Over dinner one evening, she said she'd always admired women who built something out of themselves when no one handed them a foundation. Her words lingered with me long after she left. Thomas had changed too. The boy who once thrived under constant praise had become a man willing to sit in discomfort. Over coffee one afternoon, he said, "I started therapy last month. I'm learning how much of their approval I built my identity around." It's a strange thing to unlearn. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "It's worth unlearning," he nodded. "You made that look possible." Weeks later, a cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. My mother's handwriting curved neatly across the front, the same penmanship she used on Christmas cards years ago. I set it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time before opening it. Jack stood beside me, silent but steady. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first few sentences felt rehearsed phrases about reflection and misunderstanding. But halfway through, something shifted. The words softened. She admitted they had missed my wedding, that there was no excuse, though we tried to make many. She wrote that jealousy and pride had guided their choices more than love, and that they were sorry for the pain they caused. It wasn't perfect. Parts of it still reached for justification, still clung to habit. But there was something real between the lines, a human hand trying to find the right words after decades of pretending it never had to. When I finished reading, I sat at the table, letter trembling slightly in my hands. Jack watched me waiting. "It's not everything," I said quietly. "But it's more than I expected." He nodded. "Do you want to respond, eventually?" "Just not yet." The following days passed with a calm I didn't try to analyze. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box with other small pieces of my past old photos, graduation tassels, a printed copy of my first programming award. Not trophies anymore, just markers of how far I'd come. At work, new projects filled my days, and my promotion brought larger responsibilities. The more I led, the more I found myself mentoring younger engineers, especially the ones who reminded me of that quiet girl who once coded in a corner after school. During one late meeting, an intern named Sarah stayed behind. She looked uncertain, fidgeting with her pen. "Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here," she confessed. "Everyone else seems born for it." I smiled gently. I used to feel the same way, but belonging isn't given. It's built line by line. Keep building. Her eyes brightened. "You really believe that I do?" I said. "I'm proof of it." Later that night, Jack found me still at my desk, the city lights casting soft reflections across the window. "Still changing the world one mentee at a time," he teased. I laughed, just trying to make sure no one goes through what I did alone. As the year edged toward fall, the ache of old wounds began to feel like distant weather. I could still sense it if I looked back, but it no longer touched my days. I used some of my savings to establish a small scholarship, the New Roots Fund, for students who'd experienced family estrangement or hardship and were pursuing STEM careers. I worked quietly with the foundation manager named Elise to finalize the details. During one meeting, she asked what inspired the name. I told her about a childhood oak tree that grew behind our old house, the one I used to sit under whenever the shouting got too loud. "It's still standing," I said. "I checked on Google Maps once. Roots that deep don't quit. I want this fund to be like that." When the paperwork was complete, Elise handed me the final folder. "You've turned pain into something living," she said softly. "That's not easy to do." Driving home, I felt a weight lift in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't pride. It was peace. A sense that the story I'd been rewriting one line at a time was finally finding its rhythm. A week later, Thomas and Alicia came over for dinner. We grilled on the back porch, the scent of rosemary and smoke drifting through the warm air. As twilight deepened, Thomas raised his glass toward me. "To new roots," he said with a smile, "and to second chances that actually mean something." I smiled back, glass raised. "To growing where we're finally planted." After they left, Jack and I lingered outside, watching the stars appear one by one. The porch light hummed softly, moths tracing quiet circles around it. "You think you'll ever see them again?" Jack asked gently. "I think so," I said. "But when it happens, it'll be on solid ground. Not the one they built." He nodded, slipped his arm around me, and we watched the horizon fade into night. For once, the darkness didn't feel heavy. It felt open, like the beginning of something waiting to unfold. Inside, the letter still sat in its box, folded neatly among small remnants of who I used to be. I knew that one day I'd write back, not to reopen old wounds, but to answer the part of her letter that had finally spoken from the heart. But not yet. For now, it was enough to know that forgiveness had done its work, not as surrender, but as release. The past no longer demanded my attention. What waited ahead was mine alone to shape, and for the first time in my life, that thought felt like peace. The morning after that last long talk on the porch, I woke before sunrise. The house was still the kind of still that hums with quiet peace instead of emptiness. Light crept through the thin curtains, brushing the walls in faint gold. I stood for a while by the kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching a bird hop along the fence line. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to rush toward or away from anything. Jack came in half awake, his hair a mess, voice soft. "You're up early again." "I couldn't sleep," I said, "but in a good way." He smiled as he leaned against the counter, wrapping his hands around his mug. Outside, the sky was opening into morning. "It feels different here lately," he said. Quieter. "It's not the house," I told him. "It's me." It had been months since my parents' letter arrived, and though I still hadn't answered it, I carried no bitterness. Their silence now felt like distance properly kept, a boundary that breathed instead of bled. Some days I reread the letter and felt a tug of sadness, but not regret. Forgiveness had done its work. It had turned anger into space. In the weeks that followed, life slipped back into rhythm. Work filled my days, but not my identity. The New Roots Fund had already helped 2 students begin therapy while starting their degrees, small victories that made the hours worthwhile. I received handwritten thank you notes from both, one from a young woman who wrote, "You made me believe I could start again," and another from a man studying software design who simply said, "I feel seen." Those words stayed with me. Maybe that was all I'd ever wanted to be seen, not for what I could do, but for who I was when I wasn't proving anything. Thomas visited often. He'd sit at the kitchen table scrolling through course listings for night classes, his brow furrowed in the same way our fathers used to, though gentler somehow. One evening, he looked up and said, "I've been thinking about switching careers. Something steady, maybe teaching." I smiled. "That sounds right for you." He shrugged, a little uncertain. "You really think I could?" "You already are," I said. "You're teaching by changing." He grinned, embarrassed, then laughed. It was the first time I'd seen his laughter unguarded. No show. No echo of our parents' expectations. Just Thomas as he was. When he left that night, I found a folded note on the table. "Thanks for not giving up on me," it read. I tucked it into the same box where my mother's letter rested. Different handwriting, same hope, each trying in their own way to find their way home. Dr. Martin said healing rarely looks like resolution. It looks like tending a garden after a storm. Some roots grow back, others don't. You water what remains. Her words echoed in my mind one afternoon when I drove past an open field where the wind rippled through tall grass. It reminded me of my childhood summers, the rare moments when the world felt kind. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It just existed soft around the edges. Autumn came early that year. The maples along our street turned before October, blazing red and orange like they'd been saving their color for something worth waiting for. One Sunday, Jack and I spent the morning raking leaves into neat piles, the kind of quiet chore that fills the space between two people with peace instead of talk. I could hear neighborhood kids laughing a few houses away. Their joy sounded like freedom, simple and loud. After we finished, I sat on the porch steps pulling off my gloves. The air smelled of earth and distant wood smoke. Jack handed me a thermos of cider. "You've been smiling all morning," he said. "I think I'm just learning how to enjoy things without feeling guilty for it," I said. He sat beside me, nodding. "You earned that peace." Maybe I had, but it didn't feel like something earned anymore. It felt like something finally allowed. Later that week, another letter came, this time in my father's handwriting. The envelope was thick, formal, almost hesitant. Inside was a short note. "We're proud of what you've built. We're trying to be better. If you're open to it, we'd like to see you. No pressure, no agenda." I held it for a long time. There was no manipulation in the tone, no guilt tucked between the lines. Just a cautious honesty I'd never known from him. I didn't respond immediately. I needed to decide from peace, not obligation. A few days later, I called Thomas. "Did you know they wrote again?" He hesitated. "Mom mentioned it. They're trying to take things one step at a time." "Do you believe them?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "I think I believe they're trying." That was enough for me. A week later, I drove alone to Rochester. The roads were lined with bare trees, the sky the soft gray of early winter. Their house looked smaller than I remembered, almost shy behind its trimmed hedges. My father opened the door first. He'd aged in ways that humility accelerates quieter eyes, slower movements. My mother appeared behind him, her hands twisting the hem of her sweater, like she wasn't sure where to put them. We didn't talk much that afternoon. We sat in the living room with coffee and careful pauses, but there were no sharp edges in their voices, no pretended authority. When I stood to leave, my mother reached for my hand, tentative and trembling. "Thank you for coming," she said. I nodded. "Thank you for asking me to." It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was recognition. And that was a start. On the drive home, I stopped at a small overlook just outside town. The valley below was dusted with the first thin snow of the season. I thought of all the years I had spent trying to climb toward approval, and how peace had finally come when I stopped climbing. The wind pushed against my coat, cold but clean, and for a brief moment, the whole landscape felt still enough to listen. That night, back in our kitchen, I placed my father's note beside my mother's letter in the box. I added a small photograph taken at our wedding, the one of Jack and me walking down the aisle, the sun just breaking through the trees behind us. It felt right to keep them together, the pain, the growth, and the light that followed. Time kept moving gently forward. My work at Quantum continued to evolve, but I measured success differently now. It wasn't in promotions or recognition. It was in mornings spent mentoring new developers and evenings shared with Jack and our friends in laughter that didn't have to prove anything. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still think about the child version of me sitting at that old dining table, pencil in hand, trying to earn a look of approval. I imagine sitting beside her now, taking the pencil away, and telling her she doesn't have to keep performing. She can rest. She is already enough. Winter deepened, and with it came a kind of beauty I hadn't noticed before. The way snow softened sound, how even the sharpest edges of the world seemed gentler under it. One evening, I stood by the window watching flakes swirl beneath the porch light. Jack came up behind me, his arms warm around my waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just how far we've come," I said. "How quiet life feels when you finally stop fighting for a seat that was never yours." He kissed my temple. "You built your own table," he said. I smiled. "And everyone at it gets to stay." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of a train passing somewhere in the distance. It moved through the night slowly, its whistle low and steady, fading toward horizon and peace. Some wounds don't fade because we forgive. They fade because we finally let go. And in the letting go, we make room for better things to grow. If this story found its way to you, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. I'd love to know. And if you've ever learned to make peace with your past, share what helped you get there. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about quiet strength and second chances. Thank you for listening. May your own journey lead you somewhere peaceful, and may the light always find its way back to you.